Welcome to today's webinar on PeopleSoft Top 10 Security Risk. My name is Phil Ryman. I'm the Director of Business Development at Integrigy, and I'll be the moderator for this e-learning session. Today's speaker is Stephen Coast. Steve is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Integrigy Corporation. He's been working with Oracle products since 1994, and for the last 13 years, Steve has focused on the security and auditing aspect of the Oracle e-business suite, Oracle Database, and PeopleSoft applications, and has written and presented on these topics at various national and regional conferences, including OAUG, IOUG, and National Collaborative Conferences. I'll now turn it over to Steve.
Thanks so much, Phil. Today we're going to talk about top 10 security risks in PeopleSoft. So we borrowed the idea from David Letterman on how to present what are the things that you should be looking at and how should you prioritize different security risks within the PeopleSoft environment that you're running. So before we get started, a very quick overview of Integrigy, kind of give you a little background about where we're coming from and how our background in PeopleSoft really helps to drive this presentation. Integrigy is founded in 2001 by former Big Six consultants working on large ERP implementations. And back then, over 16 years ago, we were really noticing that security wasn't being handled. People weren't changing default passwords. So the idea of a security patch wasn't there. And so really security has built up over the last 15 years dramatically in terms of security, what you have to do, the risks to the environment. And Integrigy specializes in both ERP systems and databases. So we do work with a lot with Oracle Business Suite, PeopleSoft, and a bunch of the other Oracle products such as Oracle Retail. And then we also do pure Oracle database work and SQL Server, DB2, Sybase, MySQL, and a bunch of others. We have two branches to our business. One is the product side that we actually have two products that help you secure your Oracle Business Suite, PeopleSoft, Oracle databases. The first being AppSentry. And AppSentry is actually a tool that would help find a lot of the security risks we're going to talk about today. So AppSentry is a security scanner, and it goes through your PeopleSoft configuration. And the unique thing about AppSentry is it's looking at the entire technology stack. So it's looking at the PeopleSoft application, PeopleTools, the WebLogic server, WebSphere if you have that, Tuxedo, the Oracle database, or if you're running on another database like SQL Server. It'll check all those different pieces of the platform, going against the Oracle Red Book for PeopleSoft security, but also Integrigy's best practices. So it's a very in-depth analysis of the entire technology stack, looking for security misconfigurations, what have you missed, default passwords, database initialization options, web profiles within PeopleSoft, things like that. And then we also provide proactive security for our clients who are deploying Oracle Business Suite and PeopleSoft to the internet, or even internally, they want another layer of security. So AppDefend is a web application firewall specifically designed for eBusiness Suite and PeopleSoft, and it provides very strong virtual patching protection. So when you're not applying security patches, AppDefend can close that window between the time when they're released and you apply them, or we actually have some clients who never apply security patches because they feel so confident in what AppDefend can do. And then what a lot of this presentation came from is our on-site security assessment. So we actually do a lot of work that is a true consulting organization that's working with clients to help look through their Oracle Business Suite, PeopleSoft, Oracle database environments to try to make them secure. So we're actually doing security assessments and audits. We're also helping do compliance assistance. So if you're running up against SOX, PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, those type of compliance requirements and are struggling on how to make a PeopleSoft environment secure in those with those compliance regulations, that's what we're doing every day with our clients. And then we're also helping implement products. So products like Oracle Database Vault, Imperva, Guardium, Oracle Audit Vault. So we're doing the design and requirements definition to help make sure that those products work well with the PeopleSoft environment. And then backing up Integrigy is a world-class research team. We found more security vulnerabilities in Oracle ERP products than anyone else out there. So we're very proactive working with Oracle. We're an Oracle Gold partner. We work very closely with the CSO and the different product teams to help how do you make these products secure. And so we're actively researching, working with these products, trying to break them in our labs to provide you the best information that we possibly can. That's it on Integrigy, just kind of a quick overview, give you a little background about where Integrigy is coming from and kind of what the foundation of this presentation is. So we're going to talk about the top 10 PeopleSoft security risks. And we developed these lists over time, and we have got a very rigid methodology, very stringent on how we check what we're looking at. So we're taking like the Oracle's Red book on PeopleSoft security. When we think about PeopleSoft security, our checks and what we're looking at and what we're thinking about is about 4 or 5 times the number of things included in the Red book delivered by Oracle. So we go very far beyond looking at how to actually secure this application. And so this presentation is from a lot of that work. So when we're on site looking and doing security assessments for our clients over the past 2 years, we're compiling that information. Where are clients struggling? Where are they actually making mistakes? What are they not doing? What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? And this presentation is based off of that. It's looking at, okay, what have we seen? What is the problem? Where are the true risks in these environments? Because whenever we do a security assessment, we're doing a very in-depth threat and risk analysis along with that to say, yes, this is your risky point. If you're deploying PeopleSoft to the internet, that's a very different risk profile internally. And then finally, we kind of had a little bit of a selection criteria for the top 10. We couldn't do everything. Again, we're checking 200 or 300 items, and we're just trying to pick out the top 10 here. So we really looked at what is the risk of either data loss, information disclosure, what can you address, what can you kind of fix, and that's kind of what we included in this presentation. So again, there's many more things to this. We were just trying to pull out a top 10, trying to provide you some knowledge and some background. Say, okay, think about this. This is what you might be doing wrong in your environment. So instead of hiding it, I'll kind of display it all here. So we'll walk through a bunch of different areas within the PeopleSoft technology stack. So some of these are very PeopleSoft oriented, PeopleTools oriented. Some are within the database. Some are within Tuxedo and the WebLogic. So again, this is looking at the entire technology stack, top to bottom. What are some of the things you need to be thinking about? You can't just concentrate on one area. You can't concentrate just on the application and segregation of duties because someone can circumvent the segregation of duties by going directly into the database. You need to be thinking about all these different layers of the technology stack. We'll kind of walk through. And again, this is kind of a mixture. We've tried to prioritize them, a little bit of a ranking here to go from top to bottom in terms of risk and what you should be thinking about. And then whenever we look at different risks in a PeopleSoft environment, we're thinking about it. What is the true threat? What is the risk? What are you trying to protect against? And so we've kind of categorized the top 10 here, and I'll talk about these different areas as we go through the presentation. So is it sensitive data loss? So a lot of customers are running PeopleSoft as HR. So that has very confidential data. You've got Social Security numbers. You've got very privileged information within that. You may be running PeopleSoft financials. So you may have a risk of actually people entering information in there. You may have bank accounts for employees, self-service. There may be some kind of fraud type of issues in terms of misusing of application privileges. If I can get into somebody else's account, I can actually potentially do procure-to-pay fraud depending on what you're running. And then finally, availability. Is it possible that a disgruntled employee can actually wipe out the database, cause a denial of service? What will that do to your business? What is the impact there? If you perhaps miss payroll, those types of things. So these are the types of risks that we're looking at. There's many, many more, but these are kind of a very high-level set of risks that most CIOs, most chief security officers understand, and we can kind of directly map one-to-one and really get an understanding of this. Yes, I can go in, if I have this account and I can do X, Y, and Z, I can directly enter transactions in the database. It's not that hard if you make a couple mistakes or you don't actually harden and lock down the application like you should be. So let's kind of get quickly into it and kind of jump into number one. And the reason we have put default database passwords as the first item here is this is what we see in real time in the field when we do breach investigations, we do issues that people have lost data. How did someone get into the system? What did they do? What did that attacker do? It may have been an insider. It may have been someone externally who compromised their network and was on the internal network. They may have done a phishing attack, gotten a foothold in. So what did they do next? What were they doing in order to actually compromise the environment and steal the data? And the vast majority we see at some point default database passwords are involved in that. And throughout this presentation, because PeopleSoft supports multiple technology stacks, I'm actually going to concentrate on the Oracle database and Oracle WebLogic versus looking at other databases or other application tiers like WebSphere, because that's what we see most of our clients running. Most of the issues here are applicable, so if you are running SQL Server or running WebSphere, most of the issues are applicable, just slightly different flavors and those types of things. So in this case, we'll be focusing mostly in on the Oracle database on a number of these items. So the problem here is that I need to get a foothold. If I'm going to steal data, one of the easiest ways to steal your data is actually get into the database. How am I going to do that? The Oracle database is actually fairly good at a hard, crunchy outside, but it's very soft on the inside. Once I can get into the database, no matter how I get in, and no matter what the privileges of my account are, I actually can do a lot in the database. If you're not applying database security patches very frequently, just miss privileges if you've actually granted too much to public. There's actually a lot of things once I get into the database, but it's very hard to attack an Oracle database from the outside. If I just have a network connection but don't have a login, it's actually very hard to break into an Oracle database. But once I have any sort of login, I can actually do quite a bit. There's some very easy ways that I can compromise the database, especially when you don't have security patches applied. So one of the key goals is always to protect the database, to lock it down, to make sure that someone can't get in. What's problematic with an Oracle database is there's many different accounts. So a standard Oracle database running a PeopleSoft environment will have between 20 and 75 database accounts. We've actually seen some up to 500, just depending on what you're running, what integrations, what interfaces, how many ad hoc users you're letting in, those types of things. But typically, on average, we'd say probably 20 to 75. And where those accounts come from, there's a couple different classes. They're standard accounts. So a standard Oracle database without an application running has between 7 and 24 accounts, because depending on what features you install, they'll have accounts at least sys and system, and they may have DBMS-MP, CTX sys. Again, the database is delivered with many different features, and depending what was installed in order to support PeopleSoft, you may have those features enabled or not. The PeopleSoft application will at least do 3 accounts. Those are typically named SysADM, PS, and People. And then you may have a number of interfaces and integrations coming into the database. Then you also may have named users, ad hoc users connecting. Until recently, Oracle has always had a problem when they create these accounts. They're almost always created with default passwords. So DBMS SMP, the password would be DBMS MP. CTX sys would be CTX sys. So therefore, if you don't work and make sure you're finding these and changing them, someone can easily connect to the database, and some of these accounts are very privileged. We also see for named users, usually the account creation on Oracle databases is decentralized. It's not hooked up to Active Directory. It's not hooked up to an identity management system, because Oracle doesn't do that integration very well, and it's typically a pay to do that. You have to buy additional products. Oracle AT&T fixes that because they can do Active Directory natively. But again, most accounts are created decentralized, database by database, and usually by the DBAs. And so what happens a lot of times is when people are creating these ad hoc accounts, Welcome One is a very common password in the Oracle world. So they'll actually create these very weak passwords for new users, and those users may never sign on. So you're getting default passwords a number of different ways. And the key challenge is, yes, I want to make sure they're not created, but if I run scripts, if I add add-on products, usually the password is hard-coded in there. So one of the key goals is to look and try to find these accounts before they're actually exploited. So the risk also varies on how and where these accounts come from. So if I'm a hacker, I've breached your internal network, I'm on your internal network, I've scanned for databases, and I've found a database, I'm going to actually try a number of different accounts. Some of the issues are, well, I know some of the names, I may not know all the names. So I'm going to actually start out and try those standard database accounts. That DBMS MP is in many different databases. I may be able to identify that it's a PeopleSoft database. You may have PS in the database name, so I would try those accounts quickly. But then again, you may have third-party software that attacker probably doesn't know what's installed in the database, and you may have organizational specific accounts for your own named users, your own interfaces, and things like that. So typically, the process the attacker will do is they'll get on your internal network, scan the network for Oracle databases. And this is what we're seeing in real life. This is when we do breach investigations, this is typically the process that's been taken that an attacker gets on the network, is looking for databases, and then they'll find the database and they'll try a tool like Nmap and try all these default accounts. And most of these tools have between 250 and 1,500 different known accounts. That's what they're going to try first. So when we think about risk, these standard Oracle accounts are very high risk because that's what somebody's going to try to go after. They're probably not going to go after your named accounts. They may not even go after your organizational accounts. So if I created an account Integrigy interface, most likely someone's not going to be able to break into that. But again, we don't want any default passwords. But again, very high risk is if I have a default password on like DBMSNP, some account like that, very likely that somebody will be able to find that and get in. And so one of the things that we do is we anonymize the data from our assessments and kind of combine it together to look for trends across different clients. What is the problem? Where are these accounts? And so this is an example of some of the standard Oracle database accounts. So most databases in the world will have these accounts. And the third column in, does this exist in the databases that we did assessments on? And this is over about 120 production databases, mostly very high-end systems. So a lot of these were PeopleSoft, SAP, Oracle Business Suite, Lawson, JD Edwards, Oracle Retail, so very high-end enterprise systems. And so this is how often we saw these default accounts and then how often we found passwords. So the key on the last column is that there's a system account. That's in every single Oracle database. Those are very standard accounts. DBAs change those passwords highly regularly. So they are very good about changing those. What they're not good about is changing some of these other accounts. So DBMSNP, Outline, CTXSys, these accounts are giving me a foot into the door. And if I'm not applying security patches, there's enough security vulnerabilities that are unpatched in your environment that I can compromise the entire database no matter what the privileges are on these accounts. That's a key point, is because there's security vulnerabilities in public packages, I can take over the database even with an account with 0 privileges. The only thing it's allowed to do is connect to the database. And because every account has always access to public objects, therefore, if there's a security vulnerability or something that you've misconfigured, that you've granted out too many privileges to public, like on interfaces and things like that, there's a way I can potentially escalate privileges and do things like that. So the goal is try to prevent these accounts from being created, but also make sure that you're looking on a periodic basis for default passwords. So Oracle actually has a built-in view called DBA users with that password that every DBA should be running on a periodic basis. You should be running it potentially every week, looking for default passwords in the environment because they get created over time. They may be created by a script. They may be created by a DBA who uses the default welcome one when they create an ad hoc account. So you should always be looking for these. The problem with DBA users with that password as provided by Oracle is Oracle creates this view by checking against a set of accounts. There's about 1,100 database account names that Oracle provides up front and provides a single password for each one. So DBA users with that password is only checking a set list with a set of passwords. So it's not very robust. It's not going across all your accounts. So if you created a custom account, and my example, if I created an account with Integrigy, with the password being Integrigy, DBA users with that password would not find that. And this is the way, if DBAs are checking for default passwords, this is the way they're doing it. So they're using tool number 1 here, and therefore it's limited. So it's not finding a lot of different ones. There are a number of other tools out there that you can download for free, one being AuraBF or Oracle Brute Force, where you can then take the password hashes offline and do it. Unfortunately, these are difficult to run. They're command line oriented tools. They're really meant for security people, not for a DBA to run on a continuous basis. There are some other commercial tools like our product called AppSentry. We'll check every single database account. So providing a much more robust way to do it. We're checking over 1 million passwords per account. You can add custom passwords if you know within your organization that you tend to use certain account passwords, certain names, things like that. A lot of times we use product names, so if we're doing a security assessment, we'll add in all your product names into it if you have very specific trademark product names that people like to use within the organization. So again, the goal here is to try to prevent this from happening by making sure you have policies and procedures in place that people aren't using weak and default passwords to create database accounts, but also you need to be checking it because these accounts creep up very quickly. So we see a number of cases where people upgrade applications and things like that, and the application will just create a new database account with a default password. So it happens quite frequently, and you really need to look at how to prevent it. So that's a very high level looking at database passwords, how to prevent that, how to actually find them. Within the PeopleSoft environment, there is one account that we find with a default password very regularly. And this account is called the Connect ID, and most often it's named People. You can actually change the name, but the default is named People. And the default password typically is People with a 1 instead of the L. Real tricky. But everyone knows what this is, and we find this probably about 40% to 50% of our security assessments. We find this account with this default password, and this is just intended to allow different things to connect in the PeopleSoft environment. And Oracle says, well, you don't need to change the password because it only has create session in 4 different tables, and it only has select privileges on those tables. So therefore, it's really not a problem. Unfortunately, the problem within the PeopleSoft environment is, and the Oracle database, is once I'm able to connect to the Oracle database, I can now exploit security vulnerabilities and other things. So if you're not applying critical patch updates on a regular basis, typically within each critical patch update, and at least 3 or 4 of the CPUs per year have a vulnerability in a public package, I can then take over the database, execute SQL as a sys user. So even though this is a very lowly privileged account, it can do a lot. And it just gives me a foot in the door. Other things that this account can do is it can list all the other database users. It can kind of see some of the structure of the database, including database users, roles, and other things like that within the database. So then I can at least have enough information to try other things. So again, we're trying to block access to the database, not let people in. It's kind of letting somebody in your yard, which then you let them walk around your house and peek in every window. The burglar then has that ability to peek in every window and figure out actually where everything is. Do you have an alarm system? What's going on within the environment? So that's what we're trying to stop here. So again, changing the password of the Connect ID, the People account, is very important. So moving on to number 3 now, and I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly because it's somewhat obvious, but we're still, every single client that we do a security assessment for, we see a significant problem around security patching. And I'll talk about why that is and some potential ways to help it. But again, applying security patches is the most important. So over the last 13 years, Oracle has patched 458 security bugs specific to PeopleTools and PeopleSoft. This doesn't include the ones in the Oracle database, Tuxedo, or WebLogic, which you could probably double that number and say there's probably 1,000 bugs easily across all those different products, including Java and your PeopleSoft environment. This is significant. I felt like I could even stop at this slide. This is enough reason to actually be looking at the security patches. How do you protect the environment from these types of security vulnerabilities? And some of these are very severe vulnerabilities, SQL injection, Java deserialization, that allow me to take over the application environment. Let me do whatever I want very easily. And oh, by the way, out of this 458, there's probably 60 to 70 of these that actually have very detailed exploit code published on the internet, maybe exploit tools that allow anyone with limited knowledge to actually exploit the PeopleSoft environment, take over the Tuxedo server, dump memory from the Tuxedo server, those types of things. So these are very capable bugs in order to exploit a PeopleSoft environment at different layers too. The problem with an Oracle PeopleSoft environment is that when we talk about security patches, we're not talking about one security patch. This isn't a Microsoft Windows environment where, okay, yeah, I just apply that security bundle from Microsoft to my desktops and I'm done. Unfortunately, in PeopleSoft, there are multiple different sets of patches that have to be applied because, again, the security vulnerabilities are being found in all these different areas. So within PeopleSoft, PeopleTools, Database, Tuxedo, WebLogic, and Java, all have security vulnerabilities potentially each quarter. And in almost every quarter, at least the database, WebLogic, Java, PeopleTools, and PeopleSoft do. Tuxedo is the one wild card. Some quarters it has really bad ones. Most quarters it doesn't. But each patch is different here. So I need to look at strategies on how to do these patches. And some patches I can do together. Some patches I can do separately. So on our website is a number of log entries that talk about patching a PeopleSoft environment, how to do it, what's the best approaches here. That in terms of the database, I can apply the database patch set updates without patching anything else in the environment. I can do the PeopleTools upgrades without actually patching PeopleSoft application tier. I can also do Tuxedo and WebLogic, so I can actually split these up. So there are a number of different ways that you can actually try to accelerate this in terms of getting in your environment. I can upgrade the entire environment at once. I can use DPKs to actually automate some of this patching and get it in a little bit quicker. So there's a lot of different options here, but the problem is it's still not easy. And so you're spending a lot of time and effort because of code flaws introduced by Oracle. These security flaws are introduced during the development process, and then you're paying the price down at the end of the line that you have to apply significant amounts of critical patch update security patches. Another issue that we see a lot of clients unable to apply security patches is that there's very rigorous versioning requirements around these. So as of today, if my database is not 11.204, 12.101, or 12.102 for PeopleSoft, I can't apply the most recent security patches. So Oracle is only supporting versions of all the technology stack components for generally the last 18 months. That changes based on product and timing and terminal releases of a certain version. But again, things get desupported very quickly. So I may have just upgraded to 12.101. 12.101 for the database doesn't have critical patch updates anymore. You have to now upgrade to 12.102. So there's a lot of reasons why people aren't getting these patches in a timely manner. As mitigating controls, think about blocking access to the database. If I can't get into the database, I have much less chance of actually being able to exploit it. So when we talk about and think about critical patch updates, again, kind of a broken record here, apply these on a regular basis as much as possible. Most of our clients are trying to do an N-1 type scenario, that they're applying it, all the security patches across all the layers within 90 days. So by the time, as an example, October came out a couple months ago, organizations have now applied that in test and development and are now trying to get it into production by the time the January CPU comes out. But again, now I'm seeing a large window of vulnerability there. I'm seeing that I'm open to these security vulnerabilities 30, 60, 90 days in many cases. To give you an example of a kind of one flaw here, I just kind of picked one out from October 2014. This is a little bit older, but to give you an idea of what some of the vulnerabilities may be and how different they are. In this one, the Connect ID is encrypted, and you can actually then find on the internet detailed scripts on how to decrypt the access ID and the Connect IDs that are stored within the database. And so then Oracle changed the encryption to make it stronger. So there's lots of different things. So now I can connect to the Connect ID, which is a people account, which has a default password, and I'm able to get the access ID, which is usually like the SysADM account or something like that. And I'm able to now get into the database and compromise the entire database. So that's just an example of a vulnerability. So some of these vulnerabilities are very powerful. And depending if you're just installed internally or externally, if you have PeopleSoft on the internet, your risk is very different than if there's an internal attack versus an external attack. So that's database CPUs at a high level. I'm not going to beat that one to death because everyone knows they need to apply them. But again, some of the issues around applying them and ways to hopefully make it better. Another significant issue that we see when we're doing our security assessments is direct database access by named users. And this has a bunch of different flavors to it in terms of why it's a security risk. Sometimes it's a significant number of users that are in there. And again, every user in the database can potentially compromise it if you're not applying the security patches on a very routine basis. If you're not getting in within 30, 90 days, there's published exploit code out there that any user who has a direct database connection can do. So some organizations have many, many ad hoc users in. Some organizations control it well. Another issue that we often see is they have generic accounts like HR read, PS read only, that they create these generic accounts and they just share the passwords out. So you don't know who's actually then connecting to these semi-privileged generic accounts because the passwords are shared. The passwords may be actually, we saw another case recently that the HR read password was HR read. So again, very easy to kind of connect to the database and then do things. There's a fairly significant issue within the Oracle database that there's a granularity of database privilege problem. So what typically happens is when we see these PS read-only HR read accounts, they tend to have the system privilege select any table. And select any table does exactly what you think it does. It allows you to select any table in the database. And the reason that's often granted out is, again, PeopleSoft is a very complex application. There's thousands of different tables. There is no way within the PeopleSoft Oracle database to actually grant out directly all the different tables that somebody needs and try to maintain that in an efficient way. Because every time the application is upgraded, it adds new tables. Every time you do customizations, it adds new tables. And so what happens is most organizations just default back to select any table versus saying, okay, we need 5,000 tables that everyone needs access to because we don't know actually what they need access to because they can't tell us. And so we'll try to maintain that list of grants, and it's 5,000. It's changing all the time, and all of a sudden we create a new table. Somebody has to remember to grant it out to this read-only account or to every named user's roles. So what tends to happen is everyone defaults back to select any table. And now you have generic people connecting to the database who is sharing a password, accessing potentially sensitive data like social security numbers and things like that. So a number of different recommendations here is you can do many different things here to protect this. One way is using individual accounts with roles whenever possible. And again, this is not an easy task. It's a maintenance nightmare in some cases, depending on how many users you have, what they need access to. We recommend strongly for a number of clients using virtual private database. Within the PeopleSoft Oracle database edition you have, called the Enterprise Edition, you have a license for virtual private database, which is a watered down, the base for Database Vault. So Database Vault's an additional licensed product, but you have the foundation of Database Vault in what's called virtual private database and fine-grained access controls. And so you can actually create additional levels of access controls by creating VPD policies and fine-grained access control rules that allow people to access or not access certain sensitive data. So you do know that you've got the social security numbers in there, and unfortunately you can't control, they need access to that table. You can try to create a view and manage these grants, or you can, there's also options like using virtual private database in order to limit access to certain columns and certain tables, especially when the list is short. There's some things you can do. But again, trying to manage this process and trying to figure out who has access, who's connecting, can be problematic. Anything you can do to limit this is very beneficial in security overall. One of the other issues is, how do I know what people are actually accessing? These users can't tell me. It changes all the time. One day you'll need access to this, another day you'll need access to that. So most often you have to turn on auditing to find out actually what people are accessing, what are they doing. That analysis is very difficult. Fortunately, last week, Oracle announced that within the Oracle 12c database, there's a feature called privilege analysis. It used to be included with Database Vault, but Oracle has actually now included it with the Enterprise Edition of the database. So privilege analysis is a feature within the Oracle database that allows you to track users and find out actually what privileges they're using, what are they accessing over a period of time. And then you can use that data actually to do and restrict their access to the least privileges required. So if they don't know what they need access to, you can watch them for 3-6 months, find out what they're accessing, and using the privilege analysis feature, it'll tell you actually what privileges you should be assigning to each user. So that's very beneficial. But again, anytime you're trying to figure out, okay, what privileges do people need? How are they doing it? Looking at interface accounts, how do I limit all that? Unfortunately, that's difficult and time consuming. Except privilege analysis can help you, but again, somebody still has to do the analysis, look through it, change the settings. There's no automated way to do this. But again, privilege analysis, if you're running 12c, is very helpful. But generally, this is a task that you need to spend some time on and think about is, okay, who's accessing what, why, where, and when? Do they have way too much privileges? We just finished an assessment for a large bank, and we found in one of the databases there's 300 people with select any table. So 300 people, quote, needed access to all the HR data with select any table. And when we started really getting into that and doing a took about a month to actually review that information and figure out what do people actually need. We were able to cut that list dramatically and prune it down to, by role, by department, what they would actually need access to. But again, that was a good 1 month project to figure that out, working with the client to figure out what the proper roles are. Hopefully in your environments you have a lot smaller issue, but again, looking through that and trying to figure out who needs what when is only really the best way to do it. There is another way to fix this problem, and the way we recommend it is if you limit access to the database, however, whenever possible, you make it very hard to compromise the database. So our #1 security recommendation, both for our PeopleSoft environment as well as any Oracle database-based environment, is to limit direct access to the database. Because if I do that, it becomes very hard to attack. I cannot hack an Oracle database generally if I can't connect to it. I have to be able to connect to it and sign on, and then it's very easy. But if I can't connect to the database, if I can't log into the database, it becomes very difficult to actually hack an Oracle database. So when you're thinking about trying to protect an Oracle database of any type in your environment, think about trying to protect it by limiting access as much as possible. And there's a number of different ways you can do that. Instead of having the ad hoc users connect directly, have them go through a reporting tool. Instead of having the DBAs connect from every desktop, have them go through a bastion host that is well controlled. Because then that way, my audit data also becomes more enriched because I'm controlling what can access. You can use Database Vault if you own that product to actually do connection rules that only allow certain users to access certain accounts from certain IP addresses or other rules within there. So there's lots of different options here. Anything you can do to limit that access makes the database dramatically more secure. The goal here would be only having the application servers from the application and the DBAs going through a bastion host connecting. That's the ideal situation. Then you can make that very secure. I can actually make rules to say the IP addresses from the application servers can only connect from this. My bastion host is a fixed IP address. Therefore, I can now lock that down to just a few IP addresses, and I've dramatically increased the security of my database. So again, these are just kind of things to think about. Some of the recommendations that we have, how we work with our clients to try to make sure that their database environments, PeopleSoft environments, are secured. So that's a lot about the database, kind of some background, a couple different issues there especially. Again, PeopleSoft is a very complex environment. I've got the database, I've got the application, PeopleTools, I've got WebLogic also running in it. WebLogic is a wonderful product. The way we think of WebLogic is think of Oracle has really 3 product sets. They have the Oracle database, they have the ERP applications like PeopleSoft and Oracle Business Suite, and then they have everything in between, and they call that Fusion middleware. So every other product is generally bundled into the Fusion middleware, which includes WebLogic. So WebLogic is very feature rich, so very good. A lot of things are enabled by default. It's there, it works, it does a fairly good job. Unfortunately, from a security perspective, it's all there. It's a very feature-rich product. It has a lot going on, a lot running, a lot of things that you don't need, are unnecessary, you're never going to use them, are all enabled by default. So a lot of these features are readily accessible, and now if you're deploying externally, these features are available externally. So the key here is if you are deployed externally, and in many cases, we also feel internally that you should be blocking these URLs. And so some of the examples at the bottom here are, there's a number of features here that people don't need access to, you're not using. Or as an example in the console, if you're deploying externally, WebLogic has a management console. I can't tell you how many times we do a PeopleSoft assessment, look at their external environment, and I can connect to the WebLogic console externally. That's crazy. That should not be happening. And therefore, you should be blocking these as much as possible and as frequently as possible to block access to these. And the key here is that there may be security vulnerabilities in these components. So if you aren't patching WebLogic on a frequent basis, if someone can get to these features through these URLs, which are all enabled by default, unless you specifically block them, they are there. Someone can actually exploit those security vulnerabilities. But if you've actually blocked them, that security vulnerability is effectively patched because you can't access that URL. Therefore, I can't access that, try to exploit that security vulnerability. So it's very important to block access, limit down what is available externally, especially when you're deploying PeopleSoft. So the goal is, if you are deploying externally, and we have a number of our clients internally also block as much as possible. They have a whitelist, and within that whitelist, within the load balancer or reverse proxy, they have rules. So if, unless you're coming from certain IP addresses or other locations, maybe a bastion host, you can't access many of those additional features like the WebLogic console, because there's no reason an end user needs access to that. End users need a very limited set of URLs, which typically start with things like PS, PSP, PSC, and I can make very easy rules within the load balancer reverse proxy to actually now block access to a large surface area of the application. And again, security vulnerabilities are known in a number of those components that have been patched over time, and some of these are very severe security vulnerabilities. So at the bottom here, I give you a CV. If you want to go search for that on the internet, just type that into Google, and you'll actually kind of be scared, because that's one of the security vulnerabilities that people used that attacked a large number of WebLogic environments on the internet in order to do Bitcoin mining or cryptocurrency mining, and they are actually mining anonymous currency called Monero. So they would hack into WebLogic environments, and a number of PeopleSoft WebLogic environments were hacked. They hacked in by exploiting this one security vulnerability, and the URL is on the bottom here of the screen, WLS WSAT. And there's about 10 different URLs that you could exploit, and you could execute a Java desalinization attack, which then allow you to install software on the server, and you would install the Monero mining software, which would start consuming your CPU, and you could make about $10,000 to $50,000 if you let it run for a month, and then you kind of go back by after a month and go pick it all up. And again, it was very hard to detect. The only way most people would detected that issue was they saw high spikes in their CPU on their web servers, and were kind of like, okay, why is that? And eventually it kind of dawned on them, hey, why is this one process? Oh, what's that process? Monero cryptocurrency mining software. So again, this is how it's happening. People are also concerned about your data. They want to steal your data, but they also want your CPU cycles now. It's kind of an interesting world. With the cryptocurrency prices plummeting right now, it may not be as useful, but again, now it's actually probably more useful to them, because it's harder to actually mine this and make money if you have to pay for electricity and CPUs cycles and things like that. But if you can go do it on somebody else's machine, you can actually still make some money. So one of the key things is test some of these URLs that are not needed, but you may have enabled. So like console, WLSat, monitor. We'll talk about that one in a second. So again, when you're deploying externally, try to limit access, because then you're also limiting the potential for WebLogic security vulnerabilities and even PeopleSoft security vulnerabilities and PeopleTools vulnerabilities that exist in the environment. So if you don't need access to those URLs externally, block access to them. And the whitelist typically for PeopleSoft is very easy. Some other applications we work with are very complex. PeopleSoft is fortunately very easy. There's not a lot of URLs that are actually used by most external environments. So another item we run into, fortunately we don't run into it as much anymore, but I would still say probably 20% of PeopleSoft environments internally are not encrypting the traffic between the browser and the PeopleSoft web server. So again, you should be using SSL TLS. That's when you've got the padlock in the browser. Very important to actually have that enabled, because again, things are flowing across the network in clear text, including passwords. So when I sign into PeopleSoft, that password will flow across the network unencrypted. If I'm actually accessing social security numbers and things like that, that will all flow across. SSL TLS is not enabled by default in PeopleSoft. The one thing that we strongly recommend is, if you are using a load balancer or a reverse proxy or some other device in front of the PeopleSoft environment, we strongly recommend you actually use that as the SSL termination point. So the encryption would go from the client browser to the load balancer, and then from the load balancer to the PeopleSoft environment, it would be unencrypted. But traditionally, that's within your network, maybe within the same switch, so it's very isolated. So that would be very hard to actually sniff that traffic. And the reason we recommend you use the SSL from the load balancer is that PeopleSoft is not updated as frequently as your load balancer. The SSL TLS stack isn't upgraded and maintained because you're not applying new versions of WebLogic as frequently as you would be able to just upgrade and fix your load balancer. So when security vulnerabilities come out in TLS, when the new version comes out, it's very easy to do it on the load balancer. And then the other advantage of the load balancer is that that's maintained by your centralized admins. It's not maintained by the DBAs. So when typically you would set up a SSL certificate on PeopleSoft, if you're doing it on the web server, usually the DBAs would be doing that. They're not TLS experts. They're not certificate experts. They're trying to muddle their way through it, trying to figure it out. And the problems can be introduced very quickly. This TLS configuration is not the simplest in the world. So you can actually screw it up fairly easily. So that's another reason why we recommend you move that off to the load balancer. Therefore, you've got professionals doing it, people who do this every day versus a DBA who maybe does it once a year. So that's kind of a very important. Plus, the load balancers are much better performance for the encryption and decryption than would each individual application server. There's very detailed, good documentation. If you don't have a load balancer, you can still very much enable it on the web server. But we always recommend you try to have a load balancer or reverse proxy or something in front of the PeopleSoft environment. There's been a number of issues in the different protocols related to the encryption, the SSL, TLS, and therefore most security experts now recommend that you're actually running just TLS 1.2. Within the default PeopleSoft documentation everywhere, it doesn't recommend turning these off, but there are separate notes that tell you how to do it. So you should be checking to see if your environment has only TLS 1.2 enabled, and that's all it should. TLS 1.3 is coming out in the near future. So again, another reason why you'd want your load balancer running it, because by the time you upgrade your PeopleSoft environment in WebLogic, it'll be probably 6 months to a year that TLS was available. Your load balancer would have had it, but your WebLogic running on your PeopleSoft environment probably is not going to have it for at least a year. And then you can also have old ciphers and things. In terms of kind of old ciphers, different TLS protocol versions, so if you're running TLS 1.0, generally if you're running internally, I would not be concerned about this at all. But again, if your security team does a scan, they're going to pick up very quickly that you need to be running TLS 1.2 because there's potential, if the moons line up and somebody is very sophisticated, they could actually start decrypting your traffic and doing things like that. If you are deployed externally, there are sites like SSL Labs by Qualys that will actually verify the entire TLS configuration for you. So it'll tell you what protocols you're running, what ciphers you're running, and tells you if they're correct or not. And it actually gives you a grade from A to F and tells you exactly how you're doing. If you're configuring a load balancer with TLS, you can easily get an A to an A+ grade. If you're configuring this on the PeopleSoft web server, you can usually get an A- or a B+. It's very hard to get an A just because the technology stack for WebLogic is a little bit more dated than what you can do in the load balancer. So again, we're trying to encrypt this traffic as much as possible. An issue specific to PeopleTools is that PeopleSoft has a module called the PeopleSoft Performance Monitor, or PPM. PPM has had a number of significant security vulnerabilities, one being a desynchronization vulnerability that allowed you to take over the PeopleTools servers very easily. Therefore, it should not be enabled. We think there's probably some other security vulnerabilities in it that have not been fixed yet or found and fixed. Most people don't use PPM, but have it enabled because somewhere along the line one day somebody said, oh, let's go check if there's a performance issue, and somebody at Oracle told us to do it, or one of our consultants said, oh, just turn on PPM, you can check. Unfortunately, again, we're now just enabling more functionality. We're enabling things that potentially can be exploited. So anything we can do to turn off functionality that's unused, like PPM that has had known security vulnerabilities and is very accessible at the URL/monitor, we want to turn those things off. We want to make sure that they're not accessible, and especially if we're not applying security patches on an immediate basis. If I can turn these things off, therefore they're not exploitable. And in many cases, we've got a number of clients that we do security assessments for have not applied the October 2017 CPU. Therefore, they're just sitting there vulnerable. So by turning this off, you actually fix the vulnerability also. So this is just one that we see quite often, that we can take over a system. And oh, by the way, we see PPM enabled on the internet all the time. So we do searches and we're finding clients left and right that have PeopleSoft that actually have PPM enabled on the internet. Therefore, I can take over the environment because they haven't applied security patches. So very easy to disable PPM. So there's a MetaLink note out I've referenced here. And then you just need to, you can actually very easily check the URL is /monitor and your site name, which for our demo sites are /PS. So you do /monitor/PS. And then therefore you can check if it's enabled or not. And when it's disabled, it'll actually tell you the monitor is disabled. But again, I should be also blocking that URL at my load balancer, especially externally. Another set of severe security vulnerabilities were patched recently. Hopefully everyone on the call remembers Jolt. So Jolt and Bleed was the name of the security vulnerability. And so within the Tuxedo application server, there's actually two connections allowed. One is the Java Server Listener, JSL, which allows the connections from the WebLogic server to the Tuxedo. And then there's a workstation listener. So if you're in design or in those other PeopleTools tools, you connect through WSL. Within Java, the component here, which is called the Jolt protocol, going back and forth, there was a significant security vulnerability in that allowed Jolt and Bleed, isn't it? They named it, allowed me to dump memory out of the application server. So if I had a direct connection, I could connect to the Tuxedo server and I knew the port number, I could just run a program, would actually just start dumping out the memory and just telling me everything that's flowing back and forth through the Tuxedo server. This is one of those things that's actually very easy to fix because Tuxedo has all the capabilities to actually block access and allow passwords to be configured and not allow people to connect to this directly except for the application servers. Unfortunately, it's disabled by default in PeopleSoft. So PeopleTools does not enable this, but it's very actually easy to enable. All the capabilities within PeopleTools to enable connection limiting passwords to protect and not allow you to exploit this vulnerability. So again, this is one that if you're not applying security patches, this is a very good workaround, but it's a good workaround in general. Because as an example, we think the workstation listener has similar vulnerabilities, but no one's found them. No one's spent enough time to actually figure out that if they're in the workstation listener. And so anything you can do by disabling these features and capabilities proactively ahead of time, you can limit the risk in your environment dramatically. Number 9. Application and database logging and auditing is very important in most environments. Unfortunately, within a PeopleSoft environment, because you've got such a varied technology stack, you've got PeopleTools creating logs, you've got the Oracle Database, you've got Tuxedo, you've got WebLogic. We don't see many organizations taking full advantage of what's offered and doing something with that data effectively. One is, if you ask the DBAs, why aren't they turning on auditing and logging? Why aren't you monitoring all this? They'll say, well, we don't know what the requirements are. No one's given us the requirements. If you go talk to the compliance people, oh, they're supposed to come up with it and let us know if it's appropriate or not. There's not, when you start looking at the compliance frameworks like PCI, SOX, HIPAA, those don't tell you what to turn on. So the DBAs are like, yeah, it says turn on auditing, but I don't know what auditing to turn on. So there's always a disconnect on what should be done. And then PeopleSoft makes it more difficult because if I want to turn on comprehensive auditing and logging in a PeopleSoft environment, I have to do it at the PeopleTools layer. I have to do it at the database layer. I have to do it at the WebLogic layer. I have to do it at the Tuxedo layer. And oh, by the way, all those processes are different and they all generate different audit trails. Therefore, then I have to try to get it into something. Our recommendation is to try to send it always to an external tool like Splunk, Elasticsearch, ArcSight, QRadar, Logarithm. It's very easy to send that to those tools, and those tools are very adept at it, but you need to know what you're looking at and how you're doing it. We have actually published out a free framework that walks through this whole process on our website. So it's the Integrigy framework for auditing and logging in Oracle PeopleSoft. So we've kind of given you a head start and trying to publish out, like, say, this is what you should be looking at. This is what you should be thinking about doing in terms of logging and auditing. So it's very critical to know who's connecting to the environment. Where are you getting failures? Are you getting failed sign-ons into the application? Are you getting failed sign-ons into the database? Those are clear indications of that there's an attack, that there's something wrong going on in the environment. And without that data, unless you're constantly reviewing that, getting it into a tool like Splunk to actually monitor on a real-time basis, the DBAs aren't doing that. They aren't looking at the failed logins into the application and saying, hey, actually, somebody's trying to hack us. Or I'm looking at the database layer with all those default accounts like DBMSMP, CTXSys. Is someone trying to log in those? Am I getting failed logins? We were doing an assessment recently for a client, and we saw consistent logins, failed logins at the database level at those accounts. Fortunately, they had done some work and actually changed all the passwords and they had the auditing turned on so we could prove that no one actually accessed it, but they had malware on their network, and it was actually attempting to log into databases. So this is what's happening in the real world. This is not kind of science fiction that, hey, someone's going to try to do this. People are going after databases because they know where the data is. They've really worked their way up the technology stack in terms of now looking at databases, because that's what you can get large amounts of data very easily. We don't know how the Marriott breach happened, but again, that data was in a database and was potentially compromised. So when we start looking at the audit trail within PeopleSoft, we can also do field auditing. So there's lots of capabilities within PeopleSoft that you can do many different things and very practical functional auditing. But you need to enable it. You need to spend some time thinking through the process and how to do it. And then kind of here's a little bit more roadmap. Here's some of the different locations that you can actually audit within the PeopleSoft environment at different layers of the technology stack and what you should be doing with the data. There's also some very capable things. PeopleSoft has an optional capability to actually enable DB monitoring, which actually will send up into the audit trail what the end user is. So I can actually see if an end user in the application is doing some of the things that I'm looking for in my audit trail. So again, very capable, but you need to enable it. You need to close that risk to say, I don't know what's happening in the environment. Instead, enable the auditing, get into a tool like Splunk, and monitor in real time. And the final topic is encryption. We see very few clients are actually encrypting the sensitive data at rest. Most are PeopleSoft HR environments, so significant amounts of sensitive data in the environment. You need to be encrypting that data at minimum at rest, and PeopleSoft has a number of capabilities to actually encrypt that data. So anything you can do to encrypt the data at rest across the network also, so I should be enabling SQLnet encryption. And then PeopleSoft has some access data in use encryption that encrypts it not only at the disk layer, but actually in the table level. So even if I'm signed onto the database, I can't see the data because it's encrypted. So within PeopleTools application encryption, I can actually download libraries, actually enable encryption on certain objects. It's not intended to solve every problem. It's not intended to encrypt everything, but if there's certain items I want to encrypt potentially within PeopleSoft, I can actually do that. The other option is TDE. So again, if you're running an HR environment with a significant amount of sensitive data, TDE works really well with PeopleSoft. So I can actually encrypt either columns or table spaces. We have a number of clients who are doing full database encryption now. They encrypt every single table within the database. Performance is decent on that. So PeopleSoft fully supports, as of PeopleTools 8.4.6 and above, TDE is fully supported to work with PeopleTools, and I can either do column encryption or table space encryption depending on my versions and things. So we're right about at time here. So here's our contact information. So definitely, if you have any questions about the presentation, and as Phil said earlier, we'll be mailing this out, and the recording will also be put up on YouTube, and you'll be provided a link. So Phil, is there any questions?
Yeah, there are some. There are some, actually. First one, how quickly do most PeopleSoft customers apply critical patch updates?
Yeah, so we have a little bit of data internally on that. Most often, we see very few customers are applying it within 30 days. There are a few exceptions to that. We do have some government clients that are doing that, or clients that have very high security requirements, defense contractors and things like that. Generally, it's between 30 and 90 days. Most clients are on an N-1. I would say probably 60% of our clients are trying to do an N-1, which means that by the time the next CPU comes out, you just got in the previous one. But that is giving a window of vulnerability of 90 days. But again, then there's probably 30, 40% that are not even applying security patches, or are doing it once a year, maybe once every other year, or will kind of jump and do a couple in a row, then kind of like that's too much effort, and then kind of hold off for a couple of years and catch back up. We do an analysis that when we do our on-site security assessments, we look back in history over the last 5 years to say, okay, what kind of cycle have they been on? Have they been successful or not? But generally, we're at least encouraging N-1. But if you're running externally, that is a very different risk. So if you aren't applying security patches very quickly and have an external environment, we think you should definitely look at mitigating controls. As an example, our App Defend product will provide the virtual patching for you. And it's very robust and very capable.
Next one, does TDE cause any performance problems? Should we encrypt only some tables or the entire database?
Yeah, so we have a number of clients that are encrypting the entire database, and usually what they're doing is they're also turning on compression at the same time, and therefore, in some cases, they're getting actually a net boost by turning on compression and encryption simultaneously. The compression provides such a boost, especially in terms of when you're using encryption, that they're actually seeing a net performance improvement with the compression turned on. Generally, what we say is you see about a 5% CPU utilization if you're doing the entire database. If you do individual columns, unless there's massive full table scans on those, you don't ever see a performance issue. And doing several table spaces, typically on low volume items, you'd never see a performance hit at all. But again, it's something that you should be definitely testing in a test environment, but we have not had a client in recent memory, probably the last 5 years, that had to turn off TDE because they had a performance problem, especially because the way it works with the encryption routines on the chip now, it's very high performance. Very seldom does it ever run into a performance issue unless you get a very high transaction volume on very specific tables. Is the only time you'd ever really see a performance issue anymore.
Next question. We have our PeopleSoft on the internet, but no reverse proxy. Is that an issue?
For a reverse proxy, we definitely recommend have something in front of the PeopleSoft environment to provide a layer of protection. That provides much more of a kind of just a cleaning up of the protocol, a masking of the actual end server. Does it provide a huge, robust amount of protection? No. Would you notice a difference in terms of applying security patches versus a reverse proxy? I would say spend your time applying the security patches way before I spend any time or money on a reverse proxy. But what we like to see is most organizations have a DMZ infrastructure already in place. There's no reason that a PeopleSoft environment should be placed in its own DMZ or unique environment, that you should always be trying to integrate it in with your standard DMZ that you already have deployed for other applications. Every single time we've ever worked with PeopleSoft deploying to the internet, it's always worked very well by putting it in that environment. And typically there is those load balancers, there's those devices already in that environment that should make it work. But again, anytime you're deploying to the internet, you just need to be spending time to make sure that everything is locked down. And you can filter the URLs also in WebLogic, just as easily as you could do it in a load balancer or reverse proxy. So everything that we're doing, you can do in WebLogic. Also, it's just a little bit more difficult, a little bit more time consuming, where in the load balancer, it's very easy. So generally, yes, we recommend a reverse proxy. Is it the end of the world? You don't have one? No. We're very realistic about what it does and it doesn't do. It provides a layer of security. Is it the most robust in the world? Absolutely not. But again, anything is better than nothing at a lot of these layers.
And one more. Almost all of our ad hoc users have selected any table system privilege. How should we deal with that?
Again, there's a couple different approaches. The first approach is to revoke select any table and try to figure out by user or by role what exact privileges they have. Unfortunately, that's fairly difficult to do. And so we do highly recommend explore virtual private database, VPD, and then finding what you don't want them to have access to. And if that is like 10 different columns and 10 different tables, it's actually very easy to do virtual private database rules. We have had great success with that with a large number of clients in trying to implement that and making that work successfully.
All right, I think that's going to wrap it up for us today. I want to thank everybody for taking their time and energy this afternoon, spending an hour with us, going over the PeopleSoft Top 10. Don't forget that we have another presentation on January the 17th. And also, happy holidays, everyone. It is that time of the year. So thanks again. Have a great rest of the way.